A former Notre Dame quarterback reportedly is visiting Missouri this weekend, and on paper, Drew Pyne really could be just what the doctor ordered for the Tigers. So let's talk about him and some hoops too coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, I want to talk about another Porter possibly being in the fold with Missouri basketball. And also, I've got my own idea about a person in a lower level of basketball the Tigers should target this offseason, in my opinion. But also, I want to tell you all, this episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. And as I said, Drew Pyne, former Notre Dame quarterback, and by the way, most recently at Arizona State as well, reportedly visiting Columbia this past weekend. I don't know if that visit is still ongoing here as we speak on Sunday morning or not, but certainly an interesting guy here. Pyne started 10 games for the Fighting Irish in 2022, winning 8 of those 10 starts, by the way, Notre Dame did. 22 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So at first glance, wow, this guy could be our backup quarterback. That's a pretty high level. But you see why he's in the portal once again, because, well, after transferring from Notre Dame this past season at Arizona State, Pyne was beaten out by a freshman at quarterback for a few games. He bounced around a little bit in and out of the starting lineups. Obviously, last season wasn't what he was looking for, so he entered the portal again this past December for a couple weeks, though oddly withdrew. Evidently, he actually went back to Notre Dame in order to finish up some schoolwork. So evidently, 4-star prospect out of high school, by the way, 6'1", about 200 pounds. Has as many as 3 years of eligibility left due to injuries, I'm told. So again, Drew Pyne, I think as far as realistically, who are the Tigers going to get in the transfer portal? I think this is the mold. I think this is the type of player that you're looking for, a guy who obviously has some ability, maybe some untapped ability at this point. Maybe he just had a rough 2023 for whatever reason, but obviously you're not going to get a starting SEC caliber quarterback in the transfer portal. Those guys are going to go somewhere that they can start. So I just think realistically, if Missouri indeed does get Drew Pyne, I think that's about as good as you could have expected Missouri to get what is somebody who's certainly going to be a backup quarterback, barring injury for Brady Cook in 2024. But hey, come 2025, who is going to be the next Missouri quarterback that season? The starter is very, very much in question at this point, with, of course, Sam Horn coming off Tommy John surgery. He's never really played. What do we even have in Sam Horn? Plus, obviously, several other players like Jabari Johnson have chosen to transfer. So right now, it's just Brady Cook and Aidan Glover, the true freshman coming in this season out of the state of Tennessee, somebody who just about everybody admits is a developmental quarterback at this point. So clearly, if you're Eli Drinkwitz and the Tigers, you need a veteran presence there in your quarterback room. It can't just be Brady Cook and some kid who just went to prom. Now, along with Drew Pyne, there were tons of, well, I should say dozens of big-time high school football prospects that were in town this past weekend as well, including guys I've brought up on the show recently, like Jackson Cantwell, of course, son of Christian Cantwell, former Mizzou shot putter and silver medalist in the 2008 Olympics. Also, Alabama wide receiver Dylan Alfred, who I brought up on the previous show, is in town as well, along with a couple in-state guys, Lee Summit North receiver Isaiah Mosey, and also Jack Lang, or Lange? Is it Lang or Lange? Somebody help me out with that big old offensive tackle prospect out of the state of Missouri. But regardless, it just seems like Missouri is really in on some high level guys. And that's something Drinkwitz has obviously done quite well on, is getting a high level of prospects out of high school. It seems like we might even be leveling up a little bit more after obviously a big time 2023 season and a pretty doggone good NIL infrastructure compared to some of the rest of the country too. Now, speaking of 2024, well, actually, I was recently last week, I believe on Wednesday, I was on that edition of the Locked On College Football show talking about Missouri, of course, and I was asked what my biggest concern was for this upcoming season. And if you listen to me a lot, if you're an everydayer, you probably wouldn't be surprised that I said it was corner. I just think Chris Abrams-Drain, Ennis Rakestraw, doesn't get much better than that. Actually, Georgia receiver Ladd McConkey during the combine process even brought up, like, hey, he was asked, like, hey, what was your toughest matchup last year? He said, the two guys from Missouri. So to my point, I just think that that's going to be easier said than done. So far, it sounds like Drayden Norwood is having a good camp. He had a really good 2023 as well, so that's a good start. Also, of course, Toriano Pride, former Clemson Tiger, now a Missouri Tiger. He was East St. Louis guy that Missouri was on really hard in high school. Well, now Pride, a Missouri Tiger. So hopefully, I'm not expecting the same level of production from that position as the last couple of years. I'm really not. But if we can even get 75% of it, that'd be a huge victory. Now, I did say corner on the show, but really, you could definitely say defensive line in general, the more I look at it too. Just from the amount of bodies and productive players that Missouri has lost from this past season. Of course, Johnny Walker, the Cotton Bowl MVP, he's back. Christian Williams on the inside is back. But other than Christian, you're missing three of your top defensive tackles from last season. Also, of course, Darius Robinson, a potential first-round NFL draft pick. Heck, maybe even the Chiefs will give Darius Robinson a look. I could see that happening. But obviously, there's some real productive players missing there. But it does seem like the early returns, at least if you believe new defensive coordinator Corey Batoon and the rest of the staff, seems like Darius Smith, the Georgia transfer, Zion Young, the Michigan State transfer, seems like the early returns on them are pretty encouraging. So overall, I still think it's corner. That's my biggest concern about this Missouri defense coming up. But as I to Spencer, the host of Locked On College Football, this Missouri offense really should be one of the elite units in the entire country. There's not much I'm worried about there. And on the basketball side of things, fair to say everyone expects Missouri to be quite active when the transfer portal opens up in about 8 days or so. Well, somebody is already planning on entering the transfer portal. According to On3 Sports, Jevon Porter tells On3 that he plans to enter the transfer portal in about a week or so. And at this point, from everything I've heard, I'd almost be surprised if he doesn't end up at Missouri at this point. So let's talk more about Jevon Porter coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about Nissan, because are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right in to the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. And the 2024 Nissan Armada will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Again, it's not official yet. The portal doesn't open up until after Selection Sunday in about 8 days, but Javon Porter says he's entering the portal, and by God, I believe him. But seriously, Jevon Porter, what type of player would Missouri possibly get here? And again, just from some people I talked to, apparently Jevon Porter has been in touch with Missouri already, maybe through some back channeling, that type of deal. Just long story short, at this point, as we sit here right now on Sunday morning, I'd be surprised if Jevon Porter isn't a Missouri Tiger next year. So potentially, what type of player would Missouri be getting here? Well, obviously at 6'11", 220 pounds, he's a skilled guy. Sounds a lot like his brothers a little bit, right? Now, according to Sam Vecini, who follows the draft, covers the draft for The Athletic, according to him, he says definitely a high major, every bit as modern a skill set as you'd expect from someone in the Porter family. More Jonte than Michael, as he's a big, but Javon Porter is a big summer of development and the right transfer location away from being a real 2025 draft prospect. So clearly the skill set is there, and you know, one of the reasons Javon Porter ended up at Pepperdine is not so much skill level. Of course, Lorenzo Romar, you might remember, Michael was originally going to play for Lorenzo Romar in Washington before, well, he lost his job. This was a good thing for Missouri, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, the Porter experience didn't work out how we all wanted, but think back. This was quite the coup. Well, once again, Lorenzo Romar probably going to be on his way out of Pepperdine, so Javon on his way out as well. And this season, you know what? If you just look at the numbers, you're going to be maybe a slightly bit disappointed, because from his freshman season to his sophomore season this past year at Pepperdine, well, Porter's rebounding numbers, particularly his defensive rebounding numbers, really went down, went off a cliff, really, from 18% to 13% this year. His percentage of rebounds grabbed there defensively, that's not great. It really isn't. He needs to rebound better than that for Missouri. I will say that. And also just a quick look at his three-point shooting. Conference only. During conference play as a freshman, he hit 36% of his three-pointers. Well, that was down 10% to 26%. And by the way, that's 27% for all play. So, you know, part of that, though, you look at the last 4 or 5 games for Porter, and he was a free throw shooting machine. He had 12, 11, and 11 free throw attempts in 3 of the last 4 games for Pepperdine. What that tells me is maybe they're putting a little bit too much on Porter's plate. You know, maybe he'll look a little bit better with hopefully what is an improved Missouri offensive squad next season. And quite honestly, I think at 6'11", Porter probably better learn to be a center. He probably better learn to be a defensive rebounder. That's the one thing I will say that concerns me maybe just a tiny bit at first glance, but the thing is, with the three-point shooting part, that actually doesn't concern me all that much. I think the skill set is there, and again, if he's not the number 1A option next season, which I don't expect that he will be, I think you'll see a higher quality of shot there. You won't have to take as many shots either. I think you'll see more of them go in. And plus, say what you will about Dennis Gates, he's proven he can take mediocre three-point shooters, really, frankly, below average to poor three-point shooters like Shawn East and like Kobe Brown, and turn them into elite three-point shooters in just one offseason. So there is definitely a chance that Porter's game takes a big step next season with Dennis Gates and the Tigers. Rebounding-wise, well, there's not a lot of indication that this staff emphasizes or teaches rebounding in particular, but you know what? That is one thing on paper that would worry me a little bit about Porter. And now it's time for some wild speculation on my part, because I'm going to bring up a young man here who has not announced that he's entering the portal. I have no indications that he's going to be in the portal, except for that he's been a pretty well-traveled guy already. Now, I'm not expecting Missouri to unearth the next Dalton Knecht, the former Northern Colorado player who is blowing up college basketball at Tennessee this year. But to me, Jonathan Mogbo from San Francisco is somebody that Dennis Gates and his squad should really look at hard, because even though he's at 6'9", 225 pounds, not the prototypical size for a center, and also he's not a three-point shooter either at all. He's taken 2 in his Division I career, just 2 3-pointers in 2 seasons. So he doesn't necessarily fit that Dennis Gates mold, but here's what he is. If he can play the 5, he's a guy who's the best rebounder in the West Coast Conference, the fifth most efficient scorer in that league as well. And it's an interesting league, by the way, with Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and, well, frankly, not much else, because San Francisco, Mogbo's squad is the clear third banana in that conference this season. For example, I brought up Jevon Porter. Well, his Pepperdine squad, quite a bit worse on paper than Missouri, for example. In fact, so is the rest of the conference outside of that top 3 and Santa Clara. But the thing is, San Francisco is much better than Missouri this year. So you'd think, well, why would he go to a worse squad? Well, the thing is, Mogbo, again, he has been well-traveled, played at several other schools, junior colleges, also Missouri State a year before being in San Francisco. So could he be ready to make the move back to the beautiful state of Missouri? I'm not really sure. It's just, again, the point in bringing up Mogbo here is there still are interesting guys who are at just a slightly lower level of play that could be interested in making the move to the SEC. So the idea that Missouri can't have a big turnaround next year, I think, is short-sighted. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed by any means. Clearly, this past season showed that hitting it in the portal isn't always simple. So hopefully Missouri's going to need to hit the portal hard and hit it well this offseason. No doubt about that. And of course, as you can tell, I've been talking about the future of Missouri basketball before I get to the present, because the present is just that depressing. The Tigers pulled it off. They're 0-18 in the regular season in the SEC. I would not have thought that was possible at the beginning of the season. Quite literally, I'd be going, that is not possible. We're not going to go 0-18. But here we are, and as Drew King said after the game, defensively in the second half, quote, they legitimately made LSU look like the Harlem Globetrotters. What more do you need to say? And over again, that happened. And, on offense under Gates, people want to, some people say, hey, the offense hasn't been good this year. You're right. You're 100% right. The offense has been bad this season. Really bad. I agree with you. But last season still counts. And last season, the Tigers had the 9th best offense in the country, which was the 2nd best offense of the 25 years of the post-Norm Stewart era. However, this year we're 130th. That is a massive, massive drop-off offensively. Obviously, we cannot have a repeat of that. But you know what did happen again? Porous defense, because Missouri was 180th last year in defensive efficiency. Well, they're 189 this year. So basically just every bit as bad as they were last year on defense. Now, this year, I will say, with the changing of how college basketball is officiated, part of Mizzou not being able to defend without fouling is the way the game is called. There were several cases yesterday where I'm just really not sure what our defender is supposed to do. For instance, Tamar Bates, there's a fast break. A guy for LSU is careening down the lane at full speed. Bates, you basically cannot take a charge anymore. That's not an option. So we have a bunch of guys that are jumping straight up in the air, and to me, Bates did jump straight up with his arms in the air. But again, it just seems like when the offensive player these days, well, when they try to draw contact, they get the benefit of the doubt. But honestly, though, it's just the defensive principles for Missouri need a total rethinking, because frankly, I just don't know what we're doing defensively. I'll say it before, I've said it again. We're too aggressive defensively for a team that doesn't have the requisite athleticism to make up for being out of position. Missouri's just constantly out of position, And there's really nothing they can do to make up for that when that happens. And you know what? Honestly, Missouri could have won that basketball game yesterday, but really Dennis Gates coached that game like he didn't really care if they won or not. I think he was more interested in actually making a point to at least Aidan Shaw and maybe some other guys on the roster too, because once again, I just thought his substitutions yesterday, I thought it's been bizarre most of the season. Yesterday, I just thought his strategy made absolutely no sense in one way in particular. So let's talk about Missouri's loss to LSU coming up here in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about FanDuel. You got to get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. It's FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. At one point in the second half against LSU, Missouri led 45-38 and then seemingly just got stuck on that 45 number forever. They basically scored 5 points in about 12 minutes, and then hilariously in the last 2 minutes of the ball game, they score 20 points when it doesn't matter really at all. And I'll give the Tigers credit. I'll give Dennis Gates credit. This team is still playing hard and all that good stuff. They're giving the effort for as much of an absolute disaster of a season this has been. But I'll give Dennis Gates credit for that. But for all the people who want me to criticize Dennis Gates' offense a little bit more this season, well, okay, I've got some criticisms for you, because during that scoring drought, you know, one of the big problems was Missouri was just running bad offense. For example, when you put Mabor Majak in the ball game, listen, he cannot be a fixture of the offense. And you're probably saying, well, did Mabor he took one shot as he a fixture of the offense? What I'm saying is during this run here, there was 2 or 3 possessions in a row that basically were stymied or ended in a turnover, because you cannot set high screens with Mabor Majak. Why? Because he's not a threat to score the basketball or even do anything with it positive once he has it in his hand. So what do if you're LSU and Mabor Majak sets a high screen? You double team it. It's the simplest basketball in the world, because, hey, if I'm guarding Mabor Majak 25 feet from the basket, he couldn't be less of a threat to score. And quite honestly, and again, I have no desire to pick on Mabor Majak whatsoever. He's by all accounts a great kid. And by the way, he's a walk-on. He's not supposed to be playing this much. But to me, if you're Dennis Gates, playing him over Aidan Shaw, which he did for much of the second half, is criminal. How do you do that? I understand that Shaw has not developed offensively like we would have wanted this year, but frankly, a lot of that is on Gates. That's a failure. His lack of development offensively has been a failure, but regardless, he's certainly more of an offensive player than Majak. Just his leaping ability alone, his athleticism alone, is so much more of a problem, frankly, on both ends of the court, because while Majak tries hard, he's also just he's just slow. He's a step slow, and he's a bull in a china shop. He can't really defend without fouling often either. So again, I just don't want to damn Mabor Majak here. That's not really the point. The point is I just don't see how Dennis Gates is playing him over Aidan Shaw, because at least when Aidan Shaw sets a high screen, he can dive to the basket, and he's a threat for a lob. Majak is a threat for nothing, to be brutally honest. And you know what? As great of a scorer as Shawn East has been this season, man, he still just throws some absolutely wild passes that are going to no one, second only to Jesus Carolero Martin. And honestly, that may have been the worst 3-on-1 I've ever seen in the history of basketball. Again, 3-on-1, folks. If it's 3-on-1 or 3-on-2, get the ball in the middle of the court. If it's 2-on-1, then spread out. That's your basic fundamentals there. And yet, hardly anyone in modern college basketball can seem to figure that out. A huge pet peeve of mine. Shawn East goes 3-on-1, just keeps the ball on the wing. Listen, Missouri had the formation right. Two guys spread out, one in the middle. Unfortunately, East never got the ball in the middle and instead threw an utterly bizarre lob pass over Tamar Bates' head and out of bounds. He had 7 turnovers in the ball game, although I'll give him a pass on that last one and say 6. That was desperation moment. Still felt like all 6 were crucial turnovers. Them led directly to LSU buckets. Frankly, if you're playing 2 lead guards like that in Honor and East, you shouldn't throw it away that much. You just shouldn't. And on that final play, it doesn't matter at all. Missouri was trailing by either 4 or 5. They weren't going to win anyway. But let's not have Shawn East inbound the ball in an important spot. Take one turnover, again, take that one turnover away. It doesn't really matter. That was desperation moment. But again, you're playing 2 lead guards like that. Oh, man, it's tough. When Nick Honor he's not going to be your lead ball handler. He's not your point guard, essentially. He's basically an off guard for all intents and purposes right now. So he's not going to handle the ball, and he's going to go 2 for 13 from the floor. And he's certainly not a defensive player at his size either. Oh boy, it's just tough to overcome those particular faults there. And one thing, it was nice to see Trent Pierce get in and be fairly productive in his time. Nice to see him get a dunk for his first shot, something easy for a change. That was his first points since January 20th. He did eventually hit a 3-pointer later in the game. And really it was his rebounding in the first half that I thought made a big difference. I kind of liked the look with him and Noah Carter playing together offensively. It seemed like that unit should be able to score. They started the second half, but, didn't really get us going offensively, that Carter-Pierce combination. But I still think that Pierce will be better next season, but realistically, is there any single player on this roster who you absolutely have to have back next year? You might be saying Tamar Bates. Hey, I would absolutely take Bates back, but Bates was not nearly the player that he was, say, the first half of the SEC season versus the second half. Again, context is king. So obviously he was probably having to take on a bigger load than he ideally would have. Similar to the argument I'm making about Jevon Porter at Pepperdine. So again, with better players around him, I think he can be much more efficient next season, although overall for the season he was incredibly efficient as a scorer. I'm just saying it seemed like last 10 games or so, it just felt like, maybe Bates had been worn down a little bit by having to carry such a huge percentage of the offensive load for Missouri, and opponents were able to adjust maybe to him a little bit more. But regardless, obviously Bates had a good season for Missouri. Shawn East had a great season for Missouri, but everything else kind of went off the rails, unfortunately. So you could be looking at a real hard reset of this entire roster coming up this offseason. But hey, hopefully you won't hit the reset button on Locked On Mizzou. Thanks for being patient with me. Didn't get out a show on Friday or Saturday. Frankly, I think I got food poisoning. I think that's what happened. I was laid up pretty hard for about 24 hours or so. So I appreciate you all being patient. Feeling better now. Everything's all good. We are going to survive and be back hard this week for more editions of Locked On Mizzou.